So, what about the earliest Quranic manuscripts? So these are the 6 major manuscripts. 3 of them, which I have myself in my house, not the originals, obviously, but facsimiles. Let's go through the 6 real quickly, and let's see what we know about them. Here is the first one. This is the Topkapi. The Topkapi is in Istanbul, at the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul, in Turkey. If you notice, it's got a stylized script. It's much more elongated. This is much nicer. Can you see dot there? Can you see a dot there? See, the dots are starting to be introduced. There's a medallion there. There's a versification, but you notice it doesn't. There's another verse there. If you look up here, there's another medallion there. This is where versification were starting to be introduced. But folks, that's the Topkapi. That's the best that Muslims have. It makes up about 99% of the Quran today. But it has 2,270 manuscript variants. That means words and phrases in that Quran that are not in your Quran, the one that we have today. This Quran here. Where's my Quran? This one right here. Or this one here. So that one disagrees with this 2,000 and 2,270 times. Can you see there's a problem with that? These are all consonantal books. Notice there's no vowels. Well, this one's starting to have some dots, but there's no vowels on the others. What about the one on the other side? That's the Samarkand. The Samarkand manuscript used to be the favored one that everybody was using until we started getting a hold of it and looking at it. That one only goes up to Surah 43. There's 114 surahs in the Quran. It's missing over half the Quran. What's more than that, of the 43 verses that it does include, only 1 is complete, 60 don't even exist. So it doesn't have all 43. And what's more disturbing, there are all kinds of grammatical mistakes. It's full of grammatical mistakes. So much so that his name just escapes me right now, the one from France. Anybody know the guy from France? Doros, thank you. François Doros. François Doros says, don't even use it. It's an embarrassment. Don't even use it. Because it's got so many mistakes. Obviously, it does not agree with the Quran that's on the left. 2 completely different Qurans. The Ma'il is the one that's in the British Library. Notice it has a completely different script. It is a slanted script. That's what Ma'il means, to be slanted. And it only goes up to Surah 43. It also has manuscript variants, but no one's really studied it to know how many yet. So that's something that Adam Seeker is going to do for me, because I have that one in my library. Petropolitanus, which is on the right there, only has 23% of the Quran, and within the 23% it has 93 manuscript variants. That one we do know. That one I also have in my library. The Al-Huzayni manuscript, this one here is metropolitan. It's a metropolitan text. It's a much bigger text. That's why it's so huge. It only has very few lines per page. This one is full of what we know of what we call coverings. We're going to talk about this one more because this is the Huzayni manuscript that is there in Cairo. It has got so many coverings that it's becoming an embarrassment now for Muslims today. And the one on the right is by far the most exciting. This is the most recent one that was discovered in 1975. It was discovered in Yemen when they were cleaning out the mosque dome of Sodom, the dome. What tends to happen, and see in this right, whenever a Quran starts to get when you use a Quran, it starts to get spoiled, it starts to deteriorate. What do? You don't burn it. You always hide it up into mosques, and they put it into the loft of the mosque. You leave it there, and many times you just forget them in case this is the problem at Sana, because that somebody had painted over the dome and no one knew that there was a trapdoor there. So in 1976, they were taking off and scraping off, and they came across this trapdoor. When they opened the trapdoor, all these manuscripts fell to the ground. Now, most of them were not a problem, but there was about 2 or 3 of them that they couldn't read because it had no dots and vowels. So they couldn't read it. So who did they use? They went to the Germans. The Germans, you always go to the Germans because they're always at the top of the world in this area. And there were 3 German scholars from Saarbrücken University in Saarbrücken, Western Germany, Dr. von Bothmer, Dr. Oleg, and Dr. Gerd Prinz, especially Dr. Gerd Prinz. Those 3 can read the manuscript. They can read this Arabic without the dots and vowels. So they flew them down in 1981 to take a look at that manuscript. And they started filming it with pictures and putting them onto microfilms. And they start talking amongst them. And some of those who were listening or who were working with them in the Sana group, they started hearing what they were noticing. And they were noticing that there were no dots and vowels, proving that this is probably one of the oldest, maybe even the oldest Quran in existence. But they wanted to do some more research on it. They wanted to look at the script. Because you look and you follow the script and you can see that it then changes. And if you notice carefully, the script on this page is different from the script on that page. Can you see the difference? You don't even have to know Arabic. You can see it's a different style. But as soon as they started saying this, the authorities that be realized what they were saying, and they confiscated their microfilms. And they had to fly back empty-handed. So from 1981 up until 1997, they didn't have access to their own material. It was not until they gave scholarship to 2 of their students in Sana to come and study at Sana that they finally released their manuscript, their films to them. And I went to see Dr. Gerhard Puyn in Germany, and this is his facsimile. So this is not an original. This is the facsimile that he's put together with his wife Elizabeth, and they're the ones who have now done the most research on this manuscript. And you notice there is Surah 19, and here is Surah 22. Right, in that yellow mark, it jumps to Surah 22. What happened to Surah 20 and 21? It's obviously not in that order, is it? You have to go to this side over here. Surah 20 begins over here in a completely different script. Dr. Gerhard Puyn said there was about 60 years between these 2 pages. Obviously, the left side is added much, much later. But most curiously, look at all those orange marks. See those orange marks? Every time you see an orange mark, that's what Gerhard Puyn and his wife did there. That's a manuscript variance. There's 1,000 of these orange marks. 1,000 of these. That doesn't agree with the Qur'an we have today. Now look at, these are consonantal texts. These are not vowelization or dotted. This has nothing to do with the kirat or the ahruf. Now let's summarize what we've just said.
I have a question.
Go ahead. Okay, let me just, thank you for saying that. I date these. This one here is dated to 849. However, a new doctorate has just been finished by a colleague of mine named Dr. Rami. He's now got his doctorate on this manuscript, and he is now going to change that date. I can't say what it is until August, because it's all going to be published in August. He's dating it much, much later. So hold on until August, then we'll be able to say that openly. But it's not. But that's still mid-8th century. 749, 750, right about the time that the Abbasids come to power. The one on the right is dated to about 720 to 730. So again, that's 8th century. The middle one that you see on the left is dated to 790. So that's the late 8th century. The one on the right is dated to about 715 to 725. Again, that is 8th century. The one that is on the left here, the Husseini manuscript, is dated to 900. So that may be the 10th century. Either the 9th or 10th century, it's the latest. It should be the best, and yet it turns out to be the worst. And then the one on the right is by far the earliest. It's dated to 705. That's the upper text, but there is an undertext called the palimpsest, because it was written on animal skin. When you write on animal skin and you make a mistake, you just wash it off and write underneath. Over top. And now when that happens, there's nothing there to be seen on the lower text. That ink starts to bleed through after hundreds of years, so that today now they can see the 2 texts. And I think I may be talking about that, so I'll wait till that comes up. But let's look at a summary. So, the summary of the findings. When we look at the 6 earliest Quranic manuscripts, and this is what I debated, folks. This is all I debated back in 2014. I just showed these 6 manuscripts. We know of over 100 Muslims that have given their life to Jesus Christ because of this debate, just looking at these 6 manuscripts from 2000, just in the last 10 years. None of them are from the 7th century. None of them are complete. None of them completely agree with each other. None of them completely agree with the current 1924 Hafs text. All of them have hundreds and even thousands of subsequent manuscript variants. So, when was the first complete Quran? Could we have recently discovered the oldest manuscript? Before we get to that, let's look at this one here. This is the palimpsest that I'm talking about. This is the underlayer. So you noticed over here, if you look carefully, you can see an undertext. But they wanted to find out what it was. So in order to find out what the undertext is, they put it under ultraviolet light. Can you see the lower text? Now it starts coming out really clear. So you can read the undertext. And what they found, Dr. Gerhard Puyn and Dr. Elizabeth Puyn, that there were 63 verses in this undertext with 70 variants. 25 times there were verbs and nouns and articles and participles, conjunctions that were different between the upper text and the lower text. 29 times isolated letters, prepositions and expressions were different. 16 times entire sentences and notes, some overlapping within the same verses. So sentences that are different, expressions that are different, verbs that are different, nouns that are different, prepositions that are different, pronouns that are different. It's almost like a different text. Asma Hilali, who is the one that has published a book on this, says that these are what we call school texts. These are students who have written something, they didn't know what they were writing, so the teacher comes and wipes it off and writes over top. The problem with that is nobody would give an animal skin to a student because these are very expensive. Animal skins have to be cured, they have to be washed, and it takes very enormous amount of money. You have to be only a caliph or somebody like an emperor to be able to have the material of this kind, not students. Dr. Elizabeth Quinn, and both Dr. Elizabeth and her husband say this is not school text. This is a nascent Quran with correction, then washed off and rewritten in 705. So this is the beginning of the Quran. And look at the dates. This is the time of Abdul Malik. Now do you see why that this has happened? It's the time of Abdul Malik who introduces this material against the Trinitarians. He's an anti-Trinitarian. This has nothing to do with Islam. These texts, if you look at them, are starting to be put together, and he is the one that codifies it by 705. How many remember these folios that came to light in 2015? This was all over the news. We have finally found Muhammad's Quran. Because when you put it under when you put it under radiocarbon dating 16, radiocarbon dating 14, they dated it from 568 to 645. Well, Muhammad was born in 570 and died in 632, so that covers Muhammad's life. Proof that this must have come from Muhammad. But people didn't look at it carefully. That's not a whole Quran. That's only 2 pages, front and back, front and back, front and back, front and back. Only 63 verses on those 2 folios. There are 6,236 verses in the Quran. As far as the three surahs that they incorporate, chapter 18, chapter 19, and chapter 20, there are 343 verses in those 3 chapters, yet this is only 63. So it's not even a 10th of the verses, of the numbers, a 20th of the verses that are there. It's thus not a full Quran at all. What's interesting is you need to read what they write. Chapter 18, verse 17 to 31 talks about the 7 sleepers of Ephesus. Listen, that's not Quranic. That's not even Islamic. That's pre-Quranic. It's a legend that comes from Metaphrases and Sargon from 521 that comes straight out of Turkey. Surah 19, verse 91 to 98 is a Syriac Christian and Rabbinic Apocrypha from the Proto-Evangelium of James in 145, which is then repeated by Pseudo-Gospel of Matthew in 600 AD. This is all well known. These are all, you can find these. You can go to libraries and find these. These are Christian documents. The other ones are pagan documents. And then chapter 20, 1 to 40 is the story of Moses, which comes straight out of the Bible. Conclusion? These folios are pre-Quranic, pre-Muhammad, and thus pre-Islamic, written by Christian, Jews, and secular Arab writers, and then simply borrowed by the later Muslims for their own revelations in the 8th and 10th century. Because if you're going to write a book, you've got to borrow from some source. Where do you borrow from? You borrow from the Christians, you borrow from the Jews, you borrow from the Zoroastrians, you borrow from the Ethiopians, and you even borrow from the Chinese. Yes, even from the Chinese. So if you're borrowing, of course they're going to predate it. And yes, they will be in Arabic because there are groups from every part that are Arab. There are Christians, there are Arab Jews, and there are Arab Christians who would have used these texts and passed them on one from the other. But now we get into probably the most damaging material, and this is what we know as the consonantal variants, done by this guy here, Dr. Dan Brubaker. How many people know Dr. Dan Brubaker or his book? If you don't have this book, buy it. It only costs $30. It's on the internet and Amazon. Get this book. This book has probably done more damage than any other one book. Dr. Brubaker is a good friend of mine where he works. We have a whole master's degree program that comes out of Veritas International University. There used to be in California. We've moved it now to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we have a two-year course of 10 different classes. He is the one that teaches the Quranic material. So he teaches an 8-week course just on the Quran. We have 5 professors. All of us have doctorates in different areas of Islam. Dr. Janasik and myself do all of the polemics and the apologetics material. We do anything to do with Muhammad and anything else, and also with Mecca. But he is the one that does this work on the Quran. He noticed that when he finished his doctorate in 2015, he gave me his doctorate, and it was his material that I debated Dr. Shabir Ali there in Toronto in the debate we had 10 years ago. But this is what he's found. Because he was the only one to actually go to all these manuscripts and start to take pictures of them. And he just went from page to page to page. Every time he saw a variant, he took a picture of it. And he noticed that there were insertions. See the insertion up there? Here's another insertion, Sabah, that's there. Here's another insertion above the line. These are post-production additions. But every time you see an insertion there, what's left over now supports this book, yours, Andrew, the Huff's text. He saw hundreds and hundreds of erasers. There they've erased it, there's they've erased it, there they've erased it, there they've erased it again. Every time they erased it, what's left over now supports this book, the Huff's text, consonantal text. He saw erasers overwritten. So here they've erased it, but they've just wrote over top of it, just a few letters. Here they've even done it in a different color. There they didn't bother. They didn't even bother to censor it. They just put three letters there over an entire word. These are erasers overwritten. And sometimes they just overwrite without even trying to erase. They just wrote right willy-nilly. Look at this, 2 complete lines that are written over top. And what's left over now supports this text. In every case, whether it was insertions or coverings, whether it was, insertions or erasers or written over top, it now supports the text. You can see this is a later one because it even has the dots and vowels. So there you can see the vowels and the dots been added in. So that's at a much later date, probably in the 9th or 10th century. And most damaging are the coverings. There you can see a cover. There you can see a cover. Look here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different coverings on one page. What's left over are just chicken scratches almost. And yet everything you see on that page, these are all from the Husseini manuscript that are there in Cairo, everything that is left over now supports this text. This is called censorship, standardization of a script. Here you can see a covering there. There you can see a covering there. There you can see a covering there. Here you have selective coverings overwritten. So they've covered it over there with a piece of paper and then they've written over top. Here you can see they've covered there and they've written over top. Here you can see covering without writing, but there's a covering with writing. There's one that's without writing. There's one with writing. So these are selective coverings overwritten. And what is now illegible and what you can now read now support this book here, the Huff's text. You notice I'm saying the same thing over and over and again for a reason. And then he came across these tapings here. It looks like maybe there's some damage. Until he looked at the backside, there's no damage whatsoever. That's centering the entire text. So when he read on both sides and looked at it, he noticed that supports the Huff's text. In every case, it supports the Huff's text. So textual continuity. He wanted to bring that book down, and I wanted to bring it down and introduce it in 2019. By that time, he had found 4,000 of these manuscript errors. Now remember, this is not the dots and vowels. These are consonantal differences. Much more damage in the dots and vowels, because these predate the dots and vowels. Are you following that? These are from the earliest manuscripts, the Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Ma'il, the Petropolitanus, the Husseini, and the Sana manuscript. So these predate all the later manuscripts. These are all from the 8th and 9th century. These are consonant before the dots and vowels were even invented. Look at all of these changes. So the question needs to be asked, when were these changes taking place? Thanks for asking it. Notice, all of these manuscripts were in the hands of the Ottomans. They all predate the Ottomans, but every one of them were in the Ottomans' hands. Therefore, the Ottomans had every one of these manuscripts under their jurisdiction for 700 years. It took them 700 years to make all these changes, these insertions, these coverings, these erasings over top of everything. So we wanted to introduce this book down to Speaker's Corner. Now you're going to have to close the door. And we wanted to find out how much of this and whether or not it was going to be used. But what was interesting is that while we got up on the ladder, a guy named Mansur Ahmad, you're going to see him. Mansur Ahmad is the one that's is responsible for all the manuscripts on Islamic Awareness website, which is the largest website that's a repository of all the Quranic manuscripts that exist today. They're all there. That's where you go to. It comes out of Cambridge University, and Mansur Ahmad is the one that's responsible for that. And so he was down at the corner. He saw me up on the ladder. He immediately put his ladder right next to mine. And he started to take me on. But he wanted to talk about textual veracity. I just want to quote what François Doro says. When the Al-Azhar specialists convened to produce a reliable edition of the Quran towards 1920, really 1924, they never thought of looking for the earliest written witnesses. Had they known how to identify them, but used in the course of their work the specialized literature on the qira'at, or the orthography, which developed in Muslim scholarly circles from the 2nd, 8th, and centuries on. Now, what he's saying is, no one bothered to open a book and actually do a comparison like with like. But when you look at our manuscript, like the Vaticanus or the Sinaiticus and Alexandrinus, the first thing that the scholars did was to open the book and check them out, right? When the Sinaiticus was found by Tischendorf, he sent it to London. They sent it to St. Petersburg in Russia, and that's where they checked it out to see if it was a viable script, because it was written in the, what's the capitalized, not the minuscule, but the majuscule. It was written in the majuscule script, and that's why he couldn't read it, but they could. And that's why you do that. That's why we would throw manuscripts out if they don't agree. If in doubt, throw them out. That's how you do textual criticism. I asked 3 questions. I just kept backing up. And this is what you can do. Because they're not prepared for this. You can see he waffled on. He didn't know how to answer this. Look how easy this is. You can do the same thing. They're going to make the claim that the Quran has never changed. So how do they know it's never changed? Show us the manuscript. What are you talking about? None of these manuscripts are from the 7th century. They're not from the time of Uthman. I even asked from the whole 7th century. Are any of them from the 7th century? They're not from the 7th century. I even gave them all the way up to 721. It actually should be 719. I gave him 2 extra years. So, continual textual tradition, all the way back 652, he could not come up with one. Up to 721, he could not come up with one. So he claimed that 97% of the Quran existed by 721. What does he mean by 97%? You'd like to know. So, we decided to check him up on it. And you can do the same thing. This is what he meant. To understand that, you need to go up to his his website. Here is his website. And on the website, he has 63 references to 63 manuscripts. Folks, look at how many surahs they contain. The top one up there, the MS 2165, is the Ma'il manuscript. It's about 50%. In order to get 60, he had to get 63 fragments. Some of them are not even 1 verse length. They're just little fragments of half a verse here, half a verse there, 2 verses over here. They had to add all 63 of them to get 97% of the Quran. Are you following that? What he didn't know is we were going to check him up on this. He didn't expect us to go back and look, so our team went and looked at it, and this is what we found. 20 of those are tentatively dated, the ones that you see in the green arrows. He should never have used it because no scholars have come to any agreement on this. They have no idea if these are from the 7th or the 8th century. 9 of them he should never have used because they're all after 721. They're all in the mid to late 8th centuries. Notice the very top one. In fact, most of them now are the ones they need the most, including the Ma'il, which that goes all the way across to 50%. So 9 of them, throw them out. And the other 34, no one's done any work on whatsoever. They just grabbed them because they needed them. So they got the verses they wanted. They found the manuscript that had those verses. They added them to the list, hoping that none of us would check up on them. Can you see the problem with that, folks? So in conclusion, what we have found is none of them are really valid, since all of them are either later or tentatively dated or have no supporting evidence. So, when was the Quran finally chosen? When was this Quran that I have in my hand today, when was it finally chosen? This is not the Uthmanic recension, we know that. This is also not Ibn Mujahid's Quran. This is not Al-Shatibi's Quran. This is not Al-Jazari's Quran. Those are the 4 canonizations. So when was this Quran chosen? Does anybody know off the top of your head? 1924. Oh, you all know it. Good for you. Okay, so let's get right into that. Here was the problem. In 1924, in just the city of Cairo, they had a dilemma. Because all the students were having standardized tests on the Quran. How can you have standardized tests if you get 30 different answers? Can you see the difficulty? So they had to go to Muhammad Ali al-Husayni al-Haddad, who is a scholar there at Al-Azhar University, and they had to ask him to choose just one. And he chose this one right here, the Hafs text, your Quran. Why did he choose this one here? Because this is the Quran that the Ottomans had chosen. Now can you understand why all the manuscripts are all supporting this text? They are all been changed, manipulated. Remember all the insertions we saw? Remember all the coverings? Remember all the erasers? That was done by the Ottomans so they could all come down to support the... Now remember, the consonantal text, just the consonant. We're not talking about the kirats now. Just the consonantal text. Why? The Ottomans and Al-Hussein knew that. Al-Haddad knew that. He was at Al-Azhar University. That's why he chose this text. So what did they do with the other 29? They took them out in the boat and they threw them into the Nile, thinking that would get rid of them. Little did they know that Hatun Tash was going to come around 100 years later. Thank God for Hatun Tash. But nonetheless, they're in Cairo, just the city of Cairo. Now they had one standardized Quran. That became so successful that they had to then, actually they found out lots of incorrections. So they had to change and keep changing the Quran, so that by the time 1936 rolled around, the government of Egypt realized how efficient the one for Cairo was. They made it the official Quran for the entire country of Egypt after they'd done 7 revisions of it, and they called it the Farouk edition in 1936. That was so successful that the Saudi Arabian government saw that they realized how efficient the Egyptian model was, so they decided to make the Hafs standard for all Qurans worldwide, and that's now why this is known as the Fadi edition. How many people were living in 1985? Raise your hands. Folks, those of you who are raising your hand, you're older than the canonical Quran. Doesn't that make you feel old? Now we get to the last part, and this is by far the most exciting. This is the stuff I love the most. So where did the Quran come from then? What about its internal work? Much of the Quran is very beautiful. There's that beautiful poetry that's in the Quran. 25% of it, however, nobody understands, not even the scholars. A quarter of the Quran, even the scholars don't understand. So where did the Quran actually come from? German scholar named Dr. Gunther Luding, a friend of mine. I went to go see him in Germany. He was a student in 1970, and he did his doctoral thesis on the beautiful poetry that's in the Quran. He wanted to find out about it, and he noticed that an awful lot of these poems he had heard before, because he's a Syriac scholar as well. And so he decided to take the dots off and put the Syriac dots back on. And when he did that, he was able to unpack all of this beautiful poetry, and he found that these were beautiful Christian hymns written in Syriac in the 5th and 6th century, then brought into Arabic in the 7th and 8th century, and many of them didn't have the same. But they were all Christian hymns written by Christians, had nothing to do with Muhammad, and certainly nothing to do with the eternal Quran. He got an excellent opus for writing his thesis. That's the highest grade you can get in Germany. When you get an excellent opus, you were given a professorship in any university you want. But there's a lady who is there, I can't give you her name, I'm not permitted to, she's still living today, who realized how dangerous this was, so she threw him out of the academic community, threw him into obscurity, and he and his wife were on welfare for 30 years. I went to visit him at the end of the 1990s. I wanted to meet him. I asked him, could you show me your doctoral thesis? He showed it to me. It was heavy. I opened up the first page, and the first sentence was 400 words long. Boy, wasn't any way I could read that because I don't read German. But I said, listen, if I could take us back to London, if I get this translated for you, would you mind? He said, please, take it back. So I brought it back to London, and we got the Germans in London to then translate it for us into English. Gave it back to him. He then sent it to India to get printed because nobody would publish it in Germany, and that has gone all over the world now, and because of that, he's been resurrected from obscurity because of the challenge to the Islam for a Reformation. But you need to read the small print. A rediscovery of, I've got to read it from here. I don't know if you can read it from there. A rediscovery of the reliable reconstruction of the comprehensive pre-Islamic Christian hymns hidden in the Quran, something earliest Islamic, something. So if you have, once he had done this, then gotten Christoph Luxemburg, now this is where Emil and I disagree, an Arabist who's a Syriac scholar from Lebanon, he decided to go one step further. He wanted to take the dark passages. This is the 25% that nobody understood. He wanted to find out what they were. And so he did what we call a 7-layer textual analysis. He started by checking Al-Tabari's 10th century tafsir, the commentary for an Arabic meaning of the word, and then didn't find much help. He then looked at the Lisan al-Arab, which is the Arabic dictionary from the 13th century. He could not find any. That's okay, I see that. He did not find anything there. And then he checked out if there were any homonymous or synonymous roots in Aramaic, but found meaning there, and that suddenly things started to click. By that time, he then took off all the diacritical marks like Gunther Luling did and replaced it with Syriac diacritical marks, and suddenly he started finding Aramaic roots from these different diacritics. Then he took and retranslated the Arab words back into the Aramaic using the semantics of the Syro-Aramaic words, trying to find lost meanings of the Arabic words by using a 10th century Syro-Aramaic lexicon. By the time he got to the 7th layer, he was able to reproduce all 25% of the text. And guess what he found? Once he took this Arab Quranic back to its Aramaic roots, All of the dark passages were Christian lectionaries, Christian homilies, and Christian hymns, all to Jesus Christ. Every lectionary, homily, and hymn was about Jesus. It had nothing to do with what they found, but who they found. Now, possible timeline for the Qur'an's textual revolution. Let's look at the five different periods, the 5 different canons. 7th century, you have the Aramaic texts, which were transposed into Arabic. Few of those who compiled them knew the Aramaic, and that would get back to Zayd ibn Thabit. He would not have known the Aramaic as well. I agree with you. If he didn't know the Aramaic, then of course, but I don't think there was a Zayd ibn Thabit. I think that was done much later. I don't think Uthman had anything to do because he didn't even exist. So this was probably done during the time of Abdul Malik. By the 8th and 9th century, you have the Arabic manuscripts began to appear, and that's why the manuscripts are earlier than the diacritical marks. So look at the Arab manuscripts. The manuscripts are by far the most damaging because at this time they hadn't done what you're saying. They hadn't put the dots and vowels in. And even then, look at the enormous amount of disparity just in the consonantal text. From the 8th to the 10th century, then the dots and vowels were being added to it. And that's where the copies really started to proliferate, so that you had 700 different Qur'ans by the 10th century, around 700. And then from the 10th to the 17th century, they chose 7, then 14, then 9 readings, chosen possibly as many as 152 we're now finding, in order to have a manageable number of Qur'ans to memorize. By the 20th century, then, it was then brought back to one singular Hafs Qur'an, was chosen in 1924 in Cairo, and then in 1936 for Egypt, and then for the whole world in 1985. So, folks, finally, remember the 4 claims I made at the very beginning that the Muslims make. Remember those 4 claims? The Qur'an is eternal, sent down, complete, and unchanged, perfectly preserved, right? Have we pretty much shut those 4 down today? Eternal, well, we didn't even get into that discussion. It's finally complete. Well, we're not there in the 7th century, so we don't know any complete because we can't even find any 7th century. But changed, unchanged, preserved? Lots of changes, right? Hundreds of changes, thousands of changes, continuously right through the last 2,000 years. And we would never make that about our Bible, so don't even go in there. But folks, hold on a minute. Don't we also have another Word of God who took on flesh and dwelt among us in John 1? Did he not also call himself the Word of God? Isn't he eternal? Should we apply these 4 to him? Let's do it. So, is Jesus eternal? Was Jesus sent down? Is Jesus complete? Is Jesus ever changed? Never. So, the 4 criteria Muslims are looking for in their Quran, their primary revelation, we already have in Jesus Christ, our primary revelation. Conclusion, let's bring them home to a much better, greater, and much better revelation, Jesus Christ.
Amen.